All right, coming up in a moment, Donald Trump versus the courts, the Trumpster versus the judges. That's next.
You're listening to Viewpoints with Todd Vanderhayden, the podcast. Catch Todd live Saturday afternoons at 1 on News Talk Radio, CJAD 800.
And good to have you with us on Viewpoints this weekend. Todd Vanderhayden here with you. Donald Trump's presidency is only 3 weeks old, and already we've seen it mired in a major legal showdown. Donald Trump's executive order on cracking down when it comes to immigration to the states, tightening the borders, stopping people from 7 Muslim-majority countries from coming into the U.S. for a period of 90 days and stopping refugees for 120 days has triggered a fierce backlash. Lawsuits are flying, different judges intervening, most of them to stop Trump, and the president is furious, attacking some of those judges personally, undermining the independence of the judiciary in the U.S., referring to so-called judges who will be, in his mind, responsible for violence if there are any terrorist attacks. It is unprecedented and might be a sign of things to come. This whole legal battle will be heading to the U.S. Supreme Court. Patrick Basham is my guest. He is joining me on the line from Washington, D.C., the director of the Democracy Institute, a man well placed to talk a little bit about all the twists and turns going on in the U.S. Capitol. Patrick, great to have you on the show. What is happening here in terms of this showdown between Donald Trump and the courts?
Well, Donald Trump is staying in campaign mode. So he's governing, he's beginning his new administration as if he was still a candidate. By that I mean that he is using the hot rhetoric. He is on the front foot. He's aggressive. He is taking no prisoners. He thinks, his people think, that by political pressure, they will be able to get over and around any roadblocks that anyone, including the courts or any individual judges, are thinking of putting up in their way. Of course, life is not as simple as that in Washington, even for a new presidency. So the question is, will the courts attempt to thwart Trump? And if they do, will he simply, accept the reality of that, the legal reality, and move on? Or will he continue to press down on the gas and just refuse to be stopped?
As you know, so fundamental to the notion of democracy in the United States is this division of power. And critics say Donald Trump doesn't realize this. The idea that you have the president, who's the executive, you have, Congress, which is the legislative division, then you have the judiciary, which is the legal part of the whole equation here. What Donald Trump is doing, the tweets that he's sending out, the comments that he's making, attacking these judges, is that eroding that judicial independence?
It has the potential to do so. As of today, it's too early to say. I think it is in the mind of the White House, or in terms of the strategy of the White House, it is politics. It is campaigning rather than an attempt to usurp power for the president. However, if this becomes a pattern, if we find that beyond this specific issue, that every time there's a legal challenge, Donald Trump turns to his Twitter accounts, and we're attacking individual judges and all the rest of it, then we will have a pattern. And if we have a pattern, then that is something to be concerned about. I think it's tempting for many people, obviously, to say, yes, this is the way it's going to be, and we should all be terrified. I think it's too early. I really do think it's too early to say. But we do have to be both cautious and very much on guard, because it could become a pattern, and if it does, then that would be a problem.
Patrick Basham is my guest, director of the Democracy Institute in Washington. We're talking about Donald Trump versus the courts, Trump versus judges. There's something else, Patrick, I want to get your take on, and I was reading this in the New York Times on Friday. The idea that this could risk backfiring for Donald Trump, that by attacking judges so publicly, by trying to undermine their independence, by questioning the judgments that they render, that might stiffen their spines and might make them actually even more likely to rule against him in future lawsuits, because in all likelihood, this is going to be the shape of things to come for the next 4 years.
That's quite possible. Whenever you personalize your attacks, as he has done so far, it's just human nature that you're going to stiffen the spine of the person you're up against. Particularly, these are successful, well-educated professionals. These are not people who are going to just fold in most cases. The other risk, I think, in terms of public perception that the new president is running here is that it's one thing to attack someone who is at your level or close to. So if he attacks a foreign leader or something like that, it's like a peer, an attack on a peer. But when you're attacking someone who works for the government and is at a much lower level than yourself, it can come over as just bullying. Now, because those who voted for him are in favor of what he's trying to do with his executive orders on immigration and travel, etc., I think for the time being, they're giving him the benefit of the doubt. But if he were to continue on this issue and particularly on additional issues to use what's known as the bully pulpit to literally bully people within the American government, then I think some of those who support him now would consider that to be inappropriate and might start to reconsider their support.
I think everybody, Patrick, would agree that these 7 countries that have been identified have been on the radar for many years. Even in the previous administration of Barack Obama, they do have issues with terrorism. And if you explain it rationally and you say, listen, if someone is going to come here from Libya or Somalia, we need to have the best amount of information, the most accurate information about that person before we allow them into our country. And if some of these countries, like Somalia, Libya, are almost on borderline failed state status, they don't really have any functioning government, how are we supposed to get accurate information? And I think that that is definitely a argument that can be made here. But was the rollout bungled the way Trump did this? In other words, it could have been done a little bit slower, a little bit more carefully, in order to make sure that this all went over without triggering such a huge legal battle.
I think it could have been handled much better. I appreciate that from their perspective, the White House's perspective, they wanted on this and many issues to hit the ground running, to demonstrate that they meant what they said in the campaign and that they were about doing things, about changing the way the system worked, in this case the immigration and travel system. However, you have to appreciate, if you're going to make this kind of a significant change, you have to appreciate how your system works, the mechanics of it, the logistics of it. And as you say, the fact that there are legal safeguards that you have to understand, appreciate, and surmount if necessary. And I think that because the White House was doing so much so soon, that they simply neglected to appreciate that there could be legal bumps in the road at a minimum. And they thought that either they wouldn't exist or that they wouldn't amount to much. And that was just a tactical mistake that they made.
I wonder as well about the optics, and I want to get your viewpoint on that, because this story, and it has certainly been festering now over the past, 2 weeks basically, whether it feeds into the narrative, Patrick, that Donald Trump is anti-Muslim, that his administration is mean and cruel, and that they are basically violating all of these principles, enshrined with the Statue of Liberty, what the U.S. is supposed to be all about. Whether that's true or not, that's the perception that's being sent out.
Well, it's the perception. There are 2 different perceptions, and it goes back to the election, the campaign itself. Pretty much everyone who always thought that Donald Trump had an issue with Muslims and was happy to discriminate on ethnic, racial, or religious grounds is convinced that this executive order and what is going on now, what he's attempting to do now, is part and parcel of that, and that it is un-American. It just does not represent the values of this country as they know them to be or believe them to be. At the very same time, all those who supported him during the campaign and support him now believe that this is about national security. It happens to involve almost exclusively Muslims, and therefore there is nothing morally or ethically wrong with it, however strong the policy may be. It's a necessary evil. Now, the opinion polls, the results of the polling right now, it depends a great deal, as always, on how the question is worded. But generally, most of the polls show a narrow majority support the suspension of the refugee program, the suspension of immigration from the 7 Muslim-majority countries. That doesn't mean that Donald Trump can get away perception-wise with anything. And if this sort of row continues and these legal problems, then I think the perception among his supporters may start to dim somewhat. But he is still on reasonably firm ground because roughly half of the country, right, half of Americans, do back the policy. So they're going to give him the benefit of the doubt, at least for a little while.
Patrick Basham joining us on the line from Washington, D.C., director of the Democracy Institute, talking about Trump versus the courts. Patrick, great to have you on the program this weekend. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you, Todd. Always a pleasure.
We are going to be right back.